thank you, distinguished panelists, for joining me here. Well done. So I've been watching business and business leadership for more than 3 decades, and it feels to me like something, as an observer, as a journalist, something dramatic has happened in the last few years, maybe the last decade. And it's driven by the rapid pace of technology, it's driven by things like social media, it's driven by the expectations of your employees, but it feels like the CEO leadership job has changed. Can you describe that? Am I right? And can you describe that change?
Yeah, it has definitely changed. I wasn't really active in it when it was in its before state. So I'm just operating in the current state. And you outlined 3 things, technology and globalization, et cetera. I also think it has to do with the generation of the leader, who we are as compared to who our predecessors were and the time that we grew up. So for me, one of the things that's clear about leadership, in the past, it was contained to facts and figures and specifics about your business and your job. And you had to kind of know that, you had to do that very well, everything was fine there. But now CEOs have a bigger responsibility, not only to their shareholders, but to the world, to have an opinion about what's going on in the world, to actually be in front of it. And in the past, it was actually a pride point to not have a point of view, right? To kind of remove yourself from that debate.
But that is absolutely true. I mean, I can say that as somebody, 10 years ago, if you tried to get a CEO to comment on riots in Charlottesville or transgender access to bathrooms in North Carolina, they would say, are you kidding me? No way. I mean, that doesn't have any effect on my business. Why has that changed?
Because the world is asking us, our employees are asking us to have a point of view. Governments require that we have a point of view, and we have good points of view. We're smart people, we have been all over the globe, we have facts and points of view to offer, and I think it's required now that we do this. Andrew and I spent quite a bit of time on, Steve as well, but a little bit later. Steve, you're the youngster in the group, but Andrew and I spent quite a bit of time on the Business Roundtable and these kinds of groups. And it started with, can we just talk about the tax policy kind of behind the door? Right. Can we talk about immigration behind the door?
Things that affect the bottom line.
The bottom line of our company. And it became very, very difficult and false to kind of have a debate about that without the broader debates that surround all of those policy figures. So we had to get engaged in education. We had to get really engaged in access, broad access to all people. We had to get engaged in making a point that we do well, bottom line, but we also have to do good socially. So I think it's changed a lot from that perspective. There's a lot of other things that have made it difficult as well.
Andrew, how do you see the change?
I think the business of business is just business is probably a very famous quote from someone. I don't remember who said it. But the business of business is to get a license to operate. Yeah. License to operate has changed dramatically through the forces you and Ursula have just been discussing. Clearly, the speed of communication and your judges. Your judges, your jury, the court of civil opinion is instant. And I think the reaction time has changed. Your ability to react to the multi-constituency input that you used to get in a much slower way. Second is inclusion now means that the entire value chain ecosystem has differences. Populism, leaving people behind, elitism, the 1%. Those movements have become very real, and people like us, the so-called fat cats of society, we are seen as bad people. We've had to change the way we are presented to the world because we are the company, where we represent the company, but we have to also take on a personality that says, we care about you. We care about all these constituencies. The second thing. And the last thing, as I'd say to you, is wealth has gone in the other direction in terms of our owners. Our owners have become very short term. So you've had it in your stock. You've had activism. You've had activism. I've had activism. This separation between, let's call it church and state, the holy grail of making money is just money, is now acute in one direction and the pressure on us as a result. Whereas we know that if I don't get a license to operate in the 162 countries I'm operating in, I will actually stop making money.
Steve, that Ursula and Andrew have been talking about the changing social pressures on the company and the changing demands on the CEO. But there's also something going on within the company that changes the nature of leadership. The speed of change is so much faster. The ability to actually formulate policies at the top of the hierarchy and pass them down the line is not what it was, and that changes the way you operate as well, right?
Yeah, I think the mechanisms by which people can comment on what you're doing, and you can comment on things, is really the fundamental change, in my opinion. And the expectation that you have a point of view and that other people can express it. I mean, being a CEO today, I think, is probably more like running for office 20 years ago, except that the mechanisms are very democratized, and so people have a point of view. I think also the international nature of business today forces you to interact with countries while they're developing. For example, in our case, and I think it's shared by my colleagues here on stage, what we work on is very important not only to the United States, but also to China and other places. And so you have to be a quasi-public figure just to be able to have that license to operate. And so therefore, you have to have a point of view. And I think what's interesting is different companies, they walk a different line. What's real to them or what feels natural to them is a different use of those particular mechanisms, I guess.
That point is such a huge point, Steve, this idea that business has always been global, but it's a real different global than when I started. I mean, global meant that you had factories and consumers in different countries, and you kind of visited the head of state and said, hey, did the picture. Now it's literally on policy, it's on fundamental policy, it's on this license to operate access in other countries as well. So it's global now means that you are resident in a lot of different, you have to act like you're resident in a lot of different countries.
I mean, all three of you were talking a lot about communication and the importance of communication. But 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I think there was a tendency to think that external communication and internal communication were different things. And now, I mean, Andrew, the way you were talking about this, part of the reason you engage externally is the way you motivate internally. They've merged together in some sense.
Well, I mean, in my case, when I ascended to the CEO job 15 years ago, I looked at Dow's reputation. We were in the chemical industry. You want to talk about two demotivating words to use. The external world thought we were bad people, and the internal world were not brand ambassadors. They didn't feel proud of this 100-year-old history of creating wonderful products that make humanity work. So I got to work on this intersection that we're now talking about, and I do think reinvention is part of what happens to us in our jobs. We have to keep reinventing because the role of the CEO in my 15 years changed at least 4 or 5 times, and is still changing and moving because of this need. But the internal ambassadors and motivating them for this greater good, I heard from yesterday someone use the term North Star. I think that has to be what they really feel good about. I feel good about what my leaders are doing because I actually believe in what they're doing. Yeah. It's the old heart. I've got to get my heart into it.
So I mean, another part of this challenge is focus, right? Which has always been the critical thing about the jobs that the three of you have held is there's so many demands and you have to decide what the priorities are. When you layer on the complicated world that you're operating into, that makes the focus challenge even harder, doesn't it?
It does, but I think, I'm sure that back then there was other things that pulled on CEOs. I think that one of the things that I always kind of foundation myself in is this comfort that I have some people who can do the job almost as good as I am on my team. And so I actually have to figure out the 5 to 10, these, whatever the number is, of things that I will make my North Star, the things that I will focus on. And then there are other people in the team that have to focus on other areas to make it such that when we put it all together, that we can complete the circle, if I may say. Most of the things that I focus on, though, are not like it's really a strange output, right? I don't focus on how the factory is running. I don't focus on whether our pension is okay. All those things are really important. I focus on the higher level things. So what is it that we are about? What is our company about? How do I communicate what our company is about internally and externally? What's the basis by which we make decisions? This is a big deal that I'm on now in the company that I'm engaged with. What is the basis by which we will decide what good looks like? Is it totally financial? Is it this idea about access and inclusion and financials and whatever? And those are the kind of things that are harder.
And then how do you communicate
Then how do you communicate? And how do you actually make it pervade the organization? Right? If you're not on the same basis, you can have things scattered around. That's not good, particularly if you're struggling in an industry And all of us were in industries that were transforming under pressure. I don't know if there's anybody who's not, right? Transforming under pressure from an activist, under pressure from global economy, technology, whatever. You have to have some source, some center that you could say, this is what we're going to decide based on.
Yeah. Steve, I want to stick with this notion because I don't think it's easy to grasp between why you have the three of you sitting here on stage talking about the importance of purpose, the importance of communicating where you're going, communicating values, really almost a sort of moral leadership vision. The connection between that and technology, I mean, you're deeply into the 5G movement, which is just going to speed everything up that much more, right? Everything is going to be that much more connected and that much faster. So how do you think about the effects that has on the organization?
Well, I think, you know, if you look at what the CEO should do, at least my view of it, you have to make sure you do the things that only you can do first, because if that doesn't happen, the company doesn't go in the right direction. By and large, I think it is make sure that you're working on the right problem, right? And you know, for us, for example, we are working on the 5G piece. We think it's very important. And I think you just can't, you can't sit there and say, things are going to move too quickly for me. You actually should do it the other direction, which is what do I need to do to make sure that I can live in a world with a lot of uncertainty,
Absolutely.
a lot of technology change, because that's where you get large economic benefits. That's where industries transform. That's where you have the ability to create something that doesn't exist, which is where you get a lot of benefit, not only for your shareholders, but actually your employees want to work on things that have a lot of meaning. Mm-hmm. And they want to work on the thing that touches everybody in the world. For us, it's 5G. For other people, it's other things. So I actually look at that as what a great privilege to work on those things. I mean, not many people get the opportunity to work, you know, at that sort of huge rate of change.
It's the change the world.
Yeah, and for us, we introduced sustainability. We're not in chemicals, we're into products that help us have sustainable life on this planet. And we're not the first to come up with that, but then when the employees work on it in the lab bench, and when they understand that with the product that goes out there is to help get clean water, affordable water in Africa, and they say, oh, that's my product that did that, and I worked on that. It builds a very different human dynamic inside your company.
So is that message more important internally or externally?
Both.
Or is it
Both.
I think the external message is, internally it's easier, right? Because we basically control the audience, control the message. So externally it's a lot more challenging. But if you can actually have a credible story internally, that same story should be able to transcend this border that's called the line of the company and be sellable and sustainable outside as well. Even though the judging is not fair, because they judge on significantly less information. They judge on sometimes false information. But you almost have to kind of power your way through that and just keep going, make sure that you're clear and factual. And I know that one of the things that I'm, on the board that I'm on, we're working on, two of them, is this plastics issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you know, plastics have become like the devil, right? So if you say plastic.
Straws, particularly.
By the way, straws, caps, straws are amazing, right? These little punch-out things. And if you're in a business that actually makes these things, right, you have to actually incent people to continue doing that around this vision of sustainability while you explain to the outside world what you're doing and why you're doing it. So why don't you just make paper straws or whatever the heck that is?
Well, there's a tendency of the outside world, Andrew, you know this well, to say, well, this is just pure hypocrisy. I mean, you're making plastics. How can you tell me that you're...
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
The ecosystem, seeing Ursula raised it, I better say a couple sentences. The ecosystem that is the world of plastics versus the ecosystem that is the world of paper, if I drew big boundaries around those two, you are 10 times more polluted with making paper than you are with plastic. So there's a fact delta. So now you say...
In many issues, there is a fact delta.
So there's a fact delta. So here we go. The court of public opinion, it's instant. Okay, it's out there, and suddenly it snowballs. It's on the cover of National Geographic, and all the facts are totally wrong. So then you say, well, who goes out and presents the facts? Well, it can't be the plastics industry.
Yeah, can't be.
Okay, because you've lost total credibility. So you've got to build alliances in the ecosystem, obviously consumers. But all the other partners that are involved in this miracle that humanity has brought to us called plastics. The only issue between plastics and paper is biodegradability. Every other issue is for plastics. Have you ever tried drinking out of a paper straw?
Yeah, it's not fun.
It's not offensive. So look, all of this to tell you that there's an alliance being formed actually exactly on this. My successor has formed it. They've got all the downstreams, all the upstreams, your company will be involved. And 70% of the problem is fishing nets, okay? And 90% of the problem of the 30% is in Southeast Asia and 12 rivers, okay? It's eminently cleanable. Plastics don't cause waste, humans do. So what you've got to do is put the disciplines in place to stop the waste going into the river systems.
I obviously shouldn't have gone down the path of
No,
plastics, right?
you were.
I had to say something.
You're a better moderator than I am. You picked the most provocative issues to bring up. And then, Steve, you also have geopolitical issues as well. I mean, Qualcomm got caught in the middle of this. Well, didn't get caught in the middle. You were sort of in the middle of this battle with Broadcom. That became a geopolitical issue. The CFIUS stepped in and blocked it. I mean, how do you think about that?
Well, I think that is sort of the purest and probably the most emphatic statement of you work on something important. When the government steps in and says, we want to make sure you're still working.
You're proud of that.
No, I would just say it's a statement of working on something so significant that it impacts industrial policy of countries, and therefore you have to do it. Now, what's the impact to a person like me? First of all, getting people to work on something like that, that's the easy part. Then what happens is you have people that do traditional training, like mine is in engineering, you're instantly now thrown onto the stage
of a politician.
You're a politician. And you're trying to navigate a position so that you can basically bring to life these technologies. And that's, I think, is the sort of the dynamic that now defines what it means to be kind of an international business leader. You're working on technologies that people care about so much so that they force you to work in a different stage. And that's, I guess, probably the clearest example I've seen in the last year.
Well, this is the conversation we were having earlier with Joe Kaeser. I mean, in a sense, as countries retreat, if I can use that phrase, into more nationalist policies, you folks become the global leaders.
I would say, I would argue with that, just with the construction for a second. I actually don't think they're retreating at all. I think there is a battle of ecosystems and influence, and they're actually trying to expand. But they know that there are certain technologies that are very important in order to have a position in. And the technologies need to be trusted. They need to have a number of different characteristics to allow those ecosystems to grow. So, for example, I think the internet, it's likely it could be 3 or 2 different, spheres of influence or control that happen. But underneath of that, there are certain technologies, 5G being one of them, that you need to make sure that you trust. And so the question is, if there's a small number of companies that are creating that, do we trust them? Do we know them? Do we understand what they stand for? Do we understand where the technologies come from? And that's what we're forced to do, at least as part of the job.
There is one part of your point, though, that I agree with, which is we've all operate in the new global. We are all in these countries. We all have relationships in these countries. We see that happening. We see these new ecosystems being formed better than anyone in Washington sees it, with maybe the exception of the Secretary of State, and even then. So we're living the dynamic called the new China ecosystem, the new, the new US ecosystem that's being recrafted.
You have to.
We're living it, and so this is where it gets really tricky because, what are you for? I actually was at the Business Council, I'm not sure if you either were there when all this was happening with the America First, and I said, I've never thought I'd see the day as a global company operating in the United States where I would have to make a choice between whether I'm a US company operating globally or am I a global company based in the United States.
And which is it?
I don't think that the jury's out. I think we're working our way through this.
Yeah, my perspective on it is, if you have technologies that are needed in the world, meaning that you are innovating in the right areas, you can always work through those issues. That you don't even have to you don't have to declare where you are.
The technology drives you.
You always can negotiate or find some path that allows you to find a successful business and a win-win. But it only happens if you have innovative technologies.
But it also only happens if you have rational leadership. Yep. And this is something that I think we're struggling with right about now, right? So we actually grew up in your question is, I love the way you phrase it, and the answer is the right answer. Did we ever have to really think about that? I mean, it's not something that we ever really thought about, right? I mean, we obviously thought about it, but it was never like a choice, a line in the sand. You can either be one or the other. What's happening today is that we're being called on more and more often to make a statement about that, to declare. whether you're a US company operating globally or a global company that happens to be headquartered in the United States. And I say both. But that's not a good enough answer right now. We are being asked more and more to declare that. And that's, by the way, I don't think that's helpful. It's not at all helpful. We're not only being asked by politicians.
But it's not going away.
It's not going away. We're not being asked
worse.
only by politicians. We're also being asked by our employees to make that kind of a statement, and by the public to do it as well.
I want to open it up because I know there are a lot of people out here who have experience in it. But before I do, Andrew, I mean, another geopolitical issue that you are right in the middle of now. You just stepped down as CEO of Dow. You became an advisor to the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. You have the disappearance of this Saudi journalist that is obviously raising questions in the business community about how to engage with Saudi Arabia. You were just there, weren't you?
Landed a couple of hours ago to make your panel, Alan. So
we got you out.
You got.
Look,
there's a lot I cannot say because I am in this private sector advisory side, and you can't break confidences. But I've been going to Saudi Arabia for 25 years, and I've been going to many countries for 25 years, but Saudi Arabia in particular, the last many years, the emergence of this young crown prince as a game-changing leader for that part of the world, and all the things that he's done to establish his ecosystem, his power base. Clearly, you've got something going on, and I don't have the facts. I'm sure we'll all get to see some facts here soon enough. Of what happened in the consul in Istanbul is a major reversal of his brand. And the world is looking at that and saying, you know, I don't believe you anymore. I think that's pretty harsh. I think there are many instances of political leaders around the world, including from this country, that have done things that the constituency has never been proud of. And, you know, I don't want to go through the litany in the United States, but, you know, just think CIA and some of the things that they did over the years. So look, I would say to you, we've got to be very careful here. This is a relationship that is emergent. It's no longer what it was. And it's going to a place that we should all want it to go to. And as it zigs and zags its way through there, as long as our values and our morality and our persona doesn't get abrogated, which is my personal way of operating, then I think we're fine. Right now, I hate what goes on in the instant media circus that gets created. Sorry. It's tilted the thing to, you know, if there wasn't this big conference next week, this would not be getting the airplay.
Why don't they postpone it?
Well, there's a lot of things to say about that other than there's 4,200 people going to it and about 30 have withdrawn or 50 have withdrawn or 70. They happen to be high profile.
Yeah,
they happen to be
mostly
mostly from the US.
Plane tickets.
And look, there's a lot of people who are going to go to this conference. So would you cancel it because someone in the whole maelstrom of the US media is getting upset about this? Look, we saw with the Kavanaugh hearings what happens with the media. This is a very bad time to be in the public eye, being basically tried kangaroo court style, which is my Australian heritage speaking there. But I would tell you, let's just wait and see what the facts are.
I think
you're going to pile on the media, or are you?
No. I'm actually.
He got uncomfortable when I said that.
It's. We started out on this discussion of what is the difference. One of the major differences from my perspective, or from all of our perspective, about being a leader in business. And my hypothesis is that we have to take points of view. We actually have to have an opinion. Hopefully it's based in some fact and some education, and I think that we are being faced today, because of this new role, with actually speaking out about against bad and for good. And
it's moral leadership.
It really is a difficult situation. So when you see countries, including our own, particularly when you see your own, but when you also see others, that you can get enough fact about what the behavior is, and if it's bad, then we should actually say it out loud. And that's difficult, right? Particularly if they're big trading partners, et cetera, but you can't actually avoid it.
Who has a question or a comment or a thought to add? Right there in the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Robert Quigley. I'm with International SOS, and I wanted to ask the panel to comment on the concept of a culture of health. We've talked about embracing technology, the speed of technology, digitalization, globalization. That's all well and good. But do you as CEOs ever think of the impact this is having on the mobile workforce? We support the mobile workforce. That's what we do in our company. and the incidence of mental illness is becoming so epidemic, and it's not limited to the millennials, it's applying to the baby boomers. Any mobile worker is now at risk just by virtue of traveling. We're asking them to do more and more. We're the same as you are in terms of our demands, and all this technology is wonderful, but when do we stop? Because there is no beginning, there's no end. And as we start going into more and more technology, the worker at the end is not able to define when to start and when to stop, and it's having a huge impact on their mental wellness. There's a paper that's in our literature, I'm a physician, that you may or may not have seen before, but it's 5 years old, and it's all about correlating stock value of a company and a culture of health, including mental health. I wonder if somebody would comment on that.
In 54 seconds, yes.
I could. You want to start, Steve?
Well, I'd say a lot of it comes down to the culture of the company. You have to define a path through these technologies where you utilize them kind of in the right way. And I think people, it's not a straight line. I think everyone has to figure out how to do that. I think ultimately the culture of the company needs to support a period of time or some mechanism by which people can detach. And I've seen that happen in different ways. I've had to determine that myself. I think everybody does to recharge. But on the whole, I think these technologies tend to create the environment for an improvement of people's lives and even improvement of their direct health. I think connected healthcare is probably the only way that you'll get a large change in the spend or the productivity of healthcare, which I think all in all will be a very good thing.
I thank you for the question. I think it's a good one, and thank you for the answer. I think that's a great one as well. And I do believe it's a problem. And I think Steve's point is really important, that we cannot offline this to somebody else. First, companies have to create areas where there's safety and not doing some of the things that we have gotten into bad habits of doing before we knew, right? This is 24 hours a day, that kind of thing. But individuals, and I know that in all of the companies I'm engaged with, individuals have to actually have the comfort, the strength to be able to, kind of design their lives in the right way. Stephen, what's your name again?
His name is Andrew.
Andrew.
We're not going to let him talk anymore. Because
I'm not going to ask him, but Andrew and I talked about this on the way in, about how little time the one thing we can get paid all the money in the world, and how little time that you have to kind of not be engaged. Yeah. And it's not only that, but it's a big deal. It's a big deal to do.
We have no more time, but that was a great conversation. Thank you.
What was referred
never
to there? And
you can never stop him.
No, we're addicts.
Yeah.
We haven't been through rehab yet. We've got to go through rehab to answer your question. Yeah. We've got to. As a society, we've got to relearn how to work.
Yeah.
And that's
relearn how to work.
Thank you. Ursula, Andrew, Stephen, great conversation. Thank you. Thank you.